Tonight we step into the broken library of the ancient South, where the first cities of Sumer once rose from marsh, heat, and shining mud. You're not standing before a golden temple or a marble palace. You're standing before clay, small, baked, cracked, and patient clay. In the 19th century, when excavators began uncovering the buried tablets of Mesopotamia, scholars at the British Museum and later researchers from universities such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania helped reveal a world older than most written memory. These tablets did not shout. They waited. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows quieter, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Somewhere. Perhaps your own night has already deepened. You settle into the story with the lights low while the dust of ancient Iraq gathers in the imagination. The air feels warm, almost grainy. You can picture the slow sweep of desert wind over buried walls, the pale sky lowering over old mounds, and the faint smell of dry earth after a river has withdrawn. Beneath that earth, scribes once pressed wedge-shaped marks into tablets with reed styluses. Their hands moved carefully. Their world depended on remembering. One mainstream fact is quietly astonishing. Sumerian writing preserved on clay tablets from southern Mesopotamia belongs among the earliest known writing systems in human history. Archaeologists connected with the University of Pennsylvania Museum excavated thousands of tablets from ancient Nippur, while scholars at Oxford and other institutions have studied how these texts record law, trade, hymns, myths, offerings, school exercises, and divine stories. That alone should make you pause. The oldest human writing was not only about kings, it was also about grain, workers, gods, floods, debts, songs, and fear. A civilization does not begin with a trumpet. It begins with counting. At first, the tablets seem practical, almost boring in a deeply human way. Sheep owed to a temple, beer jars assigned to workers, fields measured beside canals. Yet among these records, something stranger breathes. There are stories of divine beings shaping the world, arguing in councils, giving gifts, hiding knowledge, and making humanity fit into a design older than human memory. The god Enki appears there, not merely as a figure of worship, but as a presence moving through creation with a mind full of secrets. You might expect an ancient god to appear as thunder, fire, or a sword in the sky. Enki is different. He belongs to water beneath the earth, to wisdom, craft, magic, clever speech, and hidden order. He is connected with the deep, sweet waters that ancient Mesopotamians imagined below the surface of the world. Not the sea alone, not rain alone. Something lower, older, and more mysterious. A reservoir under existence itself. You hear it almost as a sound. A low underground water. In the old stories, Enki is not always gentle, and he's not exactly harmless. Ancient gods rarely behave like modern comfort. They are large, difficult, and often unsettling. Yet Enki carries a peculiar quality. He seems to understand the weakness of humans. He seems to notice them. Sometimes he helps them when others would let them break. Sometimes he bends divine rules without openly tearing them apart. If there's a secret plan for humanity in the Sumerian imagination, it does not appear as a single document sealed in a temple chest. It appears as a pattern, a whisper here, a rescue there, a gift that changes everything. The tablets do not give you a neat explanation, because ancient truth rarely arrives neatly wrapped. The stories are damaged, copied, translated, and sometimes incomplete. Whole lines are missing. Names survive where motives vanish. Clay breaks where meaning would have bloomed. A scholar might spend years examining one fragment, comparing signs, reconstructing a phrase, and still leave the room with uncertainty sitting beside them like a second shadow. That uncertainty matters. Some researchers see these myths as theology, composed to explain divine order and ritual power. Others treat them as social memory, shaped by floods, labor systems, irrigation, political control, and the rise of cities. A continuing scholarly debate asks whether Enki's human concern reflects moral imagination, priestly ideology, or an ancient attempt to explain why civilization feels both like a gift and a trap. Yale and Oxford scholars have long shown that Sumerian literature cannot be reduced to simple fantasy. It is poetry, power, administration, memory, and anxiety pressed into clay. And then there is the quirky tidbit, small but deliciously strange. In later Mesopotamian tradition, wisdom and civilization are sometimes imagined as mysterious divine powers, almost like portable cultural codes. The Sumerians called such powers the rules, offices, crafts, and sacred patterns that make ordered life possible. In one famous tale, Enki possesses many of them, and they are transferred through a story involving feasting, charm, and divine mischief. It is a little like imagining civilization as a collection of sacred tools stolen at a banquet. Ancient people, apparently, understood office politics rather well. There is gentle sarcasm in that, but only a little. The ancient world has earned it. You begin to feel the strange weight of the evidence. These are not modern inventions floating free from the past. They are not just bedtime monsters or easy mysteries. They are old texts from real cities, preserved on real tablets, studied by real experts. Yet within them, humanity is not described as master of the earth. Humanity is described as late, dependent, fragile, and made inside a system already operating. That idea is quietly unnerving. Long before recorded history became a confident timeline in museum displays, the Sumerian imagination had placed humans inside a divine structure. The gods had needs, the world had burdens, labor had to be done, canals had to be cleared, food had to be raised, temples had to be maintained. The cosmos itself seemed to require administration, as though creation were not a finished artwork, but a difficult estate requiring endless management. And into this system came humans. You are invited to stand at the edge of that thought, not to accept it blindly, and not to dismiss it too quickly. For the Sumerians, a myth was not merely entertainment. It explained why cities rose from mud. It explained why kings ruled, why temples owned fields, why workers carried baskets, and why the gods received offerings while ordinary people sweated in the sun. It made the human condition feel ancient, intentional, and perhaps unavoidable. But Enki complicates everything. He does not simply sit above humanity. He interferes, he advises, he creates, he protects, he tricks. He knows things that others do not know, and sometimes he lets humans receive just enough of that knowledge to survive. Not enough to become gods, not enough to escape suffering, just enough to endure. Perhaps that is the first shadow of the secret plan. Not freedom, though not paradise, endurance. The tablets beneath the desert do not reveal a single hidden truth in the modern sense. They reveal a mood, a system, and a question. Why would a god of wisdom care whether humans survived? Why would he give them skills, warnings, and fragments of order, while still leaving them inside toil and uncertainty? Why does civilization, in these ancient texts, feel like both a rescue and a sentence? You sit with that question as the desert darkens. The old mounds of Sumer cool beneath the stars. Somewhere below, in the imagined deep, the waters of Enki remain still and unseen. Above them lie the tablets, broken but speaking. They do not tell you everything. They were never going to. They only open the first door. Your mind drifts toward the first cities, not as ruins behind museum glass, but as living places of heat, noise, hunger, and devotion. The plain stretches wide beneath a pale sky, where the rivers move like slow, brown thoughts through the land. The sun hangs low and heavy. Mud walls glow the color of old bread. Reeds whisper in the marshes. Somewhere, a donkey complains with the tragic confidence of a creature certain that history has personally wronged it. You walk in imagination along a packed street of ancient Sumer. The ground is uneven beneath your feet. Sand gathers in the cracks. The smell of damp clay mixes with fish, smoke, dates, wool, sweat, and the sour sweetness of brewing beer. There are baskets everywhere, clay jars stacked beside doorways, and children darting through alleys with the same fearless energy children have wasted on adults since the beginning of time. The city is not silent, it murmurs. A potter slaps wet clay onto a wheel. A woman grinds grain in a shaded courtyard. Men carry reeds, bricks, and bundles of cut barley. Scribes sit near temple storehouses, recording deliveries with a seriousness that feels almost sacred. A farmer argues over a measure of grain, because bureaucracy, it seems, arrived very early and made itself comfortable. Above all of them rises the temple platform, high and stepped, not yet the towering form people later imagine, but already powerful enough to change the shape of the horizon. Records from southern Mesopotamia confirm that cities such as Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, and Nippur were among the earliest urban centers known to archaeology. Scholars at the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute, the University of Pennsylvania, and Oxford have studied how these settlements grew through irrigation farming, temple economies, trade, and dense social organization. The fact is simple, yet enormous. By the late 4th and 3rd millennia BC, people in Sumer were building cities where labor, religion, food, power, and writing were bound together. You feel how unnatural the city is, in the best and strangest sense. Human beings had lived for ages in smaller communities, moving with seasons, herds, and local landscapes. Here, something different is happening. The city gathers people and holds them. It asks them to build walls, clean canals, obey schedules, deliver grain, respect boundaries, and accept that someone with a stylus knows exactly what they owe. That little reed stylus has teeth. In the streets, everything depends on water. The land is rich, but it is not generous without discipline. Canals must be cut, cleared, watched, measured, and repaired. If the river blesses the fields too much, flood arrives. If it withdraws too far, hunger follows. Silt can choke channels. Salts can rise through the soil. A careless breach can ruin a neighbor's field, which is a very old way to make a very serious enemy. You stand near a canal at dusk. The water moves slowly, carrying bits of straw, fish scales, and floating green weed. Men with mud on their legs lift tools from the bank. Their shoulders ache. Their hands are cracked. The temple officials will count the harvest later, but the river has already made its own judgment. In such a world, divine order is not an abstract idea. It is survival with paperwork. Here the gods feel close because danger feels close. The city depends on forces no person fully controls. Storm, heat, disease, flood, drought, insects, war, and hunger all move near the edges of ordinary life. So the temple does not merely decorate the city, it organizes fear, it gives names to power, it places offerings where anxiety might otherwise become madness. The ancient city breathes through ritual. At dawn, priests enter sacred rooms where ordinary citizens do not casually wander. Oil lamps flicker. Incense softens the smell of brick and dust. Bread, beer, and animal offerings are arranged with care. The god is treated like a presence with needs, preferences, anger, and dignity. The divine statue is washed and clothed. Meals are presented. Songs rise. Outside, workers continue hauling loads, because even the sacred has storage requirements. That is one of the deep peculiarities of Sumerian life. The temple is holy, but also economic. It receives goods, distributes rations, owns fields, manages animals, supports specialists, and records obligations. Modern excavation at sites across southern Iraq has revealed administrative tablets that show this practical sacred world in extraordinary detail. Researchers at Yale and the University of Pennsylvania have long emphasized that early writing developed partly to manage such systems. Civilization, in this sense, begins with devotion, an inventory sharing a room. It is a very human arrangement. You pray, and someone counts the barley. A quirky detail waits in the dust of this world. Many Sumerian school tablets preserve student exercises, including lists, proverbs, model letters, and awkward practice lines. Some texts even suggest that young scribes complained about their training, their teachers, and their beatings with a familiarity that feels painfully modern. Across 4,000 years, you can almost hear a student thinking that writing is unfair, adulthood is suspicious, and teachers have far too much confidence. That small human note matters. These cities were not only places of kings and gods, they held boredom, gossip, ambition, mistakes, flirtation, scolding, exhaustion, and meals eaten too quickly. They held people who worried about debts, family honor, harvests, illness, and whether a superior official was about to become difficult. The grand mystery of Enki's plan rests inside this ordinary human noise. For a moment, it feels as though the city itself is a machine made of clay and breath. Each part moves with the others. Farmers feed priests. Priests honor gods. Scribes record goods. Kings claim divine favor. Laborers maintain canals. Craftsmen make tools. Merchants bring stone, timber, metals, and shells from far lands. Nothing stands alone. Every person belongs to a pattern larger than personal desire. This is where the hidden timeline begins to feel less like fantasy. In Sumerian thought, civilization descends from divine order. Cities are not imagined simply as human inventions, proudly built by clever ancestors who woke up one morning and invented urban planning. They are framed as gifts, assignments, and sacred arrangements. The gods possess the patterns. Humans receive them, copy them, and struggle beneath them. An open debate remains among scholars studying early Mesopotamia. Some argue that temple institutions drove urban growth by organizing labor and surplus. Others place greater weight on household economies, trade networks, environmental pressure, and political competition. Archaeologists from institutions such as Stanford and Cambridge have explored how climate, irrigation, and social hierarchy interacted across the ancient Near East. The debate continues because cities are never born from one cause. They rise from many pressures at once. You sense that pressure in the walls, brick by brick. The city teaches people to live in a new way. It teaches them to wake by obligation, to eat by distribution, to work for distant authorities, to imagine gods as landholders, and to understand life through records. This does not make them less human. It makes them recognizably human in a sharper light. The sky darkens over the plain. Fires glow in courtyards. Someone sings near a doorway while grinding grain. Dogs nose through refuse. A guard leans against a gate, tired and unimpressed by the vast importance of civilization. Above the roofs, the temple platform catches the last color of day, and the city settles into its ancient rhythm of labor and prayer. You are left with a quiet recognition. If humanity was shaped for a role in the divine order, then the earlier cities may have been the stage where that role became visible, not in a single thunderous revelation, but in grain ledgers, canal mud, temple songs, and tired hands reaching for water at dusk. For a moment, it feels as though the city has grown quiet enough for the older waters to be heard, not the river water flashing beneath sunlight, and not the canal water dragged through fields by human hands. This is a deeper water, imagined beneath the world itself, hidden below brick, reed, seed, and bone. In Sumerian thought, Enki belongs to that mysterious depth, the underground reservoir of sweet water where wisdom seems to sleep with one eye open. You stand in the doorway of a shrine at Eridu, one of the most ancient sacred places in southern Mesopotamia. The air smells of damp plaster, smoke, and offerings left too long in the heat. Outside, reeds bend in the marsh wind. Birds cry over the wetlands. The ground is soft in places, treacherous in others, as though the earth itself remembers that it was once water. It is here, in this old southern landscape, that Enki's presence begins to feel less like a character and more like a hidden principle. He is the god of wisdom, craft, cunning, purification, creation, and the life-giving deep. He is often associated with Eridu, a city later tradition remembered as ancient even in antiquity. Mainstream research from institutions such as the University of Chicago, Oxford, And the British Museum confirms that Enki, known in Akkadian tradition as Ea, held a central role in Mesopotamian religion. Texts describe him as a master of knowledge, ritual power, magical speech, and the cosmic waters beneath the earth. That is already strange enough, yet Enki is not wise in a cold, distant way. He is not simply a judge seated above events, counting failures with divine patience. He is inventive, restless, and sometimes alarmingly clever. He solves problems sideways. He speaks in riddles. He grants knowledge, withholds it, rearranges fate, and slips through the cracks of divine authority. He feels like the kind of god who knows exactly where the rules are written, because he may have helped draft them, a little dangerous though they're in myth. Enki's wisdom is practical as much as cosmic. He is connected with builders, scribes, exorcists, craftsmen, and those who understand hidden workings. The boatman, the irrigator, the singer, the healer, the magician, the planner of canals, and the keeper of sacred formulas all stand somewhere in the shadow of his gifts. Wisdom here is not only abstract thought, it is how a door fits its frame, how a spell is spoken, how water is directed, how a city survives. You notice the difference at once. Some gods command awe from the sky. Enki gathers power from systems. He understands structure. He sees how small mechanisms create large consequences, move the water, and fields live, teach a craft, and a city grows, whisper a warning, and a species continues. It is not dramatic in the loud sense. It is worse than dramatic. It is efficient. His home is often imagined as a watery dwelling, a sacred house tied to the deep. You picture it not as a palace of glittering fantasy, but as a cool, dim place below the burning world. Water laps against stone, reed shadows tremble, lamps glow in bronze bowls. The walls are marked with signs that seem almost readable, until the eye follows them too closely. Knowledge is present there, but never entirely offered. That is the feeling Enki brings into the tablets. He reveals, but not completely. He helps, but not simply. He creates, but also traps creation inside conditions. He protects humanity, yet humanity remains mortal, hungry, and bound to labor. Even mercy, in his hands, has boundaries. Perhaps the ancient scribes understood something difficult about intelligence. The clever rescuer may also be the architect of the maze. In one Sumerian composition, Enki organizes the world by assigning roles and powers to gods, lands, cities, and human crafts. The text does not present creation as random beauty. It presents creation as distribution. This belongs here. That belongs there. This city has this destiny. That craft has that divine backing. Order descends like a net over the world, and every knot has a name. You can almost hear the scribe pressing signs into clay, a mark for office, a mark for power, a mark for the sacred rule that makes a thing what it is. The act of writing mirrors Enki's world. Both turn flowing life into patterns that can be stored, repeated, and controlled. There is a sleepy terror in that thought, but it is very quiet. It does not rush toward you. It waits until you notice. The quirky tidbit comes with a smile from the edge of the temple. Enki is sometimes involved in stories where divine drinking leads to cosmic consequences. In one tale, he feasts with the goddess Inanna, and sacred powers are handed over after beer and persuasion do their ancient work. It is oddly comforting to learn that even in divine myth, civilization may have been redistributed during what sounds like a very serious banquet with poor supervision. Ancient gods had meetings. Apparently, they also had refreshments. Yet the humor does not weaken the mysteries, or it sharpens it. Enki's world is not stiff or lifeless. It is full of appetite, negotiation, cleverness, and risk. The gods are not machines. They argue, desire, regret, compete, and improvise. Their decisions shape human life, but those decisions often emerge from tension rather than perfect serenity. That makes the human condition feel more fragile, not less. A current scholarly debate asks how much of Enki's character reflects ancient theology, and how much reflects social realities of early Mesopotamian expertise. Some researchers at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have examined how gods of wisdom and writing may embody the authority of scribes, priests, healers, and administrators. In that view, Enki's secret knowledge mirrors the specialized knowledge that made cities function. Others stress his deeper mythic role as a creator figure whose waters symbolize fertility, purification, and cosmic order. Both views can sit together in the dark. The god may be theological poetry, political memory, and social structure at once. That is how ancient religion often works. It refuses to stay in one room. You listen again to the imagined water beneath the Eridu. It does not roar. It moves slowly, like thought forming before speech. Enki's wisdom is not only the wisdom of answers, it is the wisdom of timing, concealment, and release. He knows that knowledge can save. He also knows that knowledge can unsettle the hierarchy that keeps the heavens arranged. This is where his secret plan begins to breathe more clearly. Humanity, in these stories, is not merely given life. Humanity is given tools, not all tools at once, and not without cost. Speech, craft, ritual, irrigation, writing, and survival skills become part of a gradual awakening. Humans remain servants in the divine system, but they become servants who can remember. They can build. They can copy signs. They can bury tablets in walls and leave questions for distant minds. That may be the quietest rebellion of all. As night settles over the marshes, you imagine a priest washing his hands in a basin before entering the god's presence. The water is cool against his skin. The temple stones hold the day's heat. Somewhere beyond the shrine, the city breathes in sleep, wrapped in mud, brick, and darkness. Beneath everything, Enki's deep remains unseen. He's not only a god in the water, he is the thought beneath the story, the intelligence below the surface, the keeper of gifts that arrive disguised as burdens. And as you stand at the edge of that old sacred depth, you begin to understand why the Sumerians did not place humanity's fate in the hands of a simple creator. They placed it near a god who could scheme. The air changes when the story turns toward the making of humans. It becomes heavier, like a room where a difficult decision has already been made. You're no longer standing only among canals, shrines, and the soft clay of early cities. You're standing inside a question that has followed human beings across every age. Why are we here? And why does existence so often feel like work? In the Sumerian and later Mesopotamian imagination, the answer is not always comforting. Humanity is not first presented as the beloved center of creation, shining under a generous heaven. Humanity appears inside a world where the gods themselves are burdened. The divine order has weight. Fields must be watered, canals must be maintained, food must be prepared, shrines must be served. The universe, rather inconveniently, seems to require labor. Someone has to do it. You sense the ancient logic with unsettling clarity. The gods desire rest, food, worship, and order. Yet the work of sustaining the world is constant. It grinds on like a millstone. In several Mesopotamian traditions, human beings are fashioned to take over a burden once carried by lower divine beings. The story is not gentle, but it is revealing. Creation begins not with romance, but with exhaustion. Mainstream Assyriology has long recognized this theme in Mesopotamian literature, especially in texts where humanity is made to relieve divine labor. Scholars trained at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have discussed how these myths reflect temple economies, irrigation work, and the everyday pressure of organized labor. The important fact is clear. Ancient Mesopotamian creation traditions often connect human origins with service to the gods. That idea makes the dust feel closer. You picture workers at dawn moving toward the fields before the heat becomes punishing. They carry baskets, hoes, ropes, jars, and tools worn smooth by use. Their feet sink into damp soil along a canal bank. Insects rise from the reeds. The river smells of mud, fish, rot, and life. A supervisor waits with a list. A scribe waits with a tablet. The gods may be invisible, but obligation has a very visible face. The myth gives cosmic meaning to that ordinary scene. The basket on the worker's back is not merely a basket. It becomes part of a structure reaching from earth to heaven. The rations given out from the temple are not merely food. They become evidence of an arrangement in which humans feed gods, institutions feed workers, and the world continues because everyone accepts the pattern, or at least survives inside it. Still, the pattern is not entirely cruel in its own ancient terms. To be made for labour is also to be made necessary. Humanity may be lowly, but humanity is not irrelevant. The gods need human service. Temples need human hands. Fields need human bodies. Offerings need human preparation. Songs need human voices. The myth places people beneath the divine, but also inside a sacred economy where their existence matters. That is a strange kind of dignity. The unsettling part is the bargain. Humans receive life, skill, fertility, community, and the possibility of memory. In return, they receive toil, hierarchy, hunger, and mortality. Nobody in these stories appears to ask humanity whether the terms are acceptable. There is no friendly consultation. No one says, "Please review this cosmic agreement by sunset." The ancient imagination is sharper than that. Life is given, and the invoice is already attached. Here Enki's role becomes complicated. In some traditions, he helps solve the crisis of divine labour by shaping the plan for human creation. He is the clever mind who knows how to turn conflict into structure. Yet if Enki helps bring humanity into being for service, how can he later appear as humanity's protector? This is the troubling beauty of the myth. The same god associated with wisdom and aid may also participate in the system that binds humans to work. Perhaps ancient wisdom is rarely innocent. You move through a courtyard where women knead bread for offerings. Their palms press dough again and again. Flour dust clings to their wrists. A child watches from the shade, chewing a date and learning the shape of adult necessity. Nearby, a brewer tends beer jars, because even gods and workers require drink in this deeply practical universe. The smells are warm, yeasty, smoky, and human. A quirky detail hides inside the tablets of daily life. Mesopotamian workers were often paid in rations, including barley, oil, wool, and beer. Beer was not some rare luxury at the edge of respectability. It was ordinary, nourishing, and deeply woven into labour systems. So when you imagine a worker serving the temple, you should not picture only solemn incense and stern priests. You should also picture ration beer, tired jokes, and someone hoping the distribution clerk is not in a creative mood. Civilization has always required snacks, yet the humour fades when the mythic structure returns. Human beings are created because the divine world has a problem. They are the solution, but also the cost of the solution. Their bodies become tools of order. Their voices become instruments of praise. Their dead become ancestors, remembered or forgotten beneath floors, fields, and later ruins. The human being is both worker and witness. An open scholarly debate continues over how directly these creation myths mirror social reality. Some researchers argue that stories of humans created for divine labour reflect the rise of temple-controlled economies and the need to justify hierarchy. Others, including historians influenced by comparative religion and anthropology, suggest that the myths speak more broadly about the human experience of toil, mortality, and dependence on powers beyond control. Scholars from Stanford, Chicago, and Oxford have approached these questions from archaeology, literature, and social theory. Without reducing the text to one meaning, the debate remains alive because the stories are too rich to flatten. They explain labour, but also suffering. They support hierarchy, but also reveal anxiety about it. They honour the gods, but show those gods as needy. They make humanity small, yet strangely central. That is not simple propaganda. It is a clay mirror, cracked but still reflective. You feel the weight of that mirror as the evening settles across the city. The temple platform glows with fading light. The last workers return from the fields, shoulders bent, sandals dark with mud. Smoke rises from ovens. Dogs bark at nothing important, which is their ancient profession. A scribe smooths a tablet and presses marks that may outlive everyone he knows. Those marks carry a severe idea. Humans are made to serve, but the story does not stop at obedience. Even in the thought of humanity as labour, something unpredictable enters the design. A worker can remember, a singer can alter a song, A scribe can copy a myth and leave a trace of sympathy in the curve of a phrase. A city built to serve the gods can become a place where humans discover themselves. That may be where Enki's secret begins to turn inward. If humans are created to carry burdens, then giving them intelligence changes the burden completely. They do not merely dig canals. They wonder who ordered the digging. They do not merely bake offerings. They ask who hungers in heaven. They do not merely die. They carve names, bury tablets, and imagine that some listener in a far age may understand. You are that listener now, resting near the edge of the ancient bargain. The clay is cool in your imagined hand. The signs are small, but their meaning is immense. Humanity may have been made for divine labor, yet within the labor there is consciousness. Within service there is memory. Within the burden there is the first quiet possibility of refusal, not shouted, not complete, but present like water under stone. And somewhere beneath the old world, Enki listens. The whispered plan takes shape in the narrow spaces where power does not look directly. You are not shown a throne room with a bright proclamation. You are given fragments, hints, sideways gestures, and moments when Enki appears to help humanity without fully breaking the divine arrangement. His mercy does not arrive like daylight. It arrives like water finding a crack in a sealed wall. You feel the old city at night. The heat has loosened its grip, but the bricks still breathe warmth into the dark. A lamp trembles near a doorway. Somewhere a reed mat shifts as a sleeper turns. The smell of ash, stale beer, wool, and river mud hangs low in the alleys. Dogs move like shadows through rubbish piles, carrying the quiet dignity of animals who know too much about human leftovers. The temple still rises above everything. At this hour, the city's labor becomes memory. The day's commands are finished, or at least paused. The baskets have been set down. The canal tools rest against walls. The scribes have covered their damp tablets, or left them to dry. Yet in the stories, divine business continues even when humans sleep. Councils gather, decisions form, fates move, and Enki, master of hidden knowledge, remains awake in the deep. A mainstream historical fact helps anchor this mystery. Sumerian literature often survives in copies made centuries after the oldest traditions began, especially through scribal schools in Mesopotamian cities. Researchers associated with the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have shown that myths were copied, taught, adapted, and preserved as part of learned culture. The texts are not one frozen voice. They are living traditions shaped by generations of scribes. This matters because Enki's plan is not spelled out like a royal decree. It is reconstructed from a repeated behavior across mythic scenes. He helps create humans, but later shields them. He supports divine order, yet softens its harshness. He knows the official system, yet seems willing to bend its edges when life itself is threatened. The pattern is subtle enough to feel almost accidental, until it appears again. Then it appears again. You imagine a scribe in a schoolroom copying a line about Enki's wisdom. The room smells of damp clay and young frustration. The teacher watches with the calm menace of a person who believes handwriting reveals moral character. Boys, and sometimes perhaps girls within elite households, learn lists of signs, gods, professions, animals, places, and proverbs. The world is pressed into categories. Knowledge becomes a ladder, but only some may climb. Enki stands behind that ladder, not visibly, perhaps, but in meaning. He is connected with the arts that make civilization durable. The scribe does not merely write about him. The scribe participates in a world Enki makes possible. To record grain, name a god, preserve a spell, or copy a flood story is to touch the dangerous power of memory. You can almost feel the wet clay giving way beneath the stylus, and memory changes labor. A laborer without memory only suffers the day. A laborer with memory can compare days, tell stories, mark injustice, preserve skill, and teach a child what was learned at cost. A city without memory must repeat confusion. A city with writing can organize, dominate, protect, deceive, and endure. Enki's gifts do not free humanity from burden, but they make the burden meaningful enough to become history. That may be his first quiet rebellion, He does not remove humans from the system. He makes them more than tools inside it. The quirky tidbit here is wonderfully odd. In some Mesopotamian traditions, secret wisdom belongs to ritual specialists who guard formulas, incantations, and technical knowledge with great care. The specialist could be healer, exorcist, scholar, singer, and administrator of invisible trouble all at once. Imagine calling one person because your roof leaks, your child has a fever, your omen looks grim, and a demon may be involved. Ancient customer service was ambitious. Still, beneath that dry little smile, something serious remains. Knowledge was power because the world felt crowded with unseen forces. Words mattered, names mattered, ritual timing mattered, the correct substance, gesture or phrase could purify a space, calm a fear, or restore order. Enki's wisdom, therefore, it was not casual cleverness. It was survival knowledge in a universe that could turn hostile without warning. You drift closer to the hidden plan through these small channels. Enki seems to give humanity what it needs to remain viable. Not invincible, not equal to the gods. Viable. He grants or guards the conditions by which fragile beings can continue in a difficult world. Craft, ritual, speech, organization, warnings, patterns. The plan, if it is a plan, may be less about overthrowing heaven and more about preventing human life from being erased by heaven's own severity. A scholarly debate lingers over this interpretation. Some researchers see Enki's sympathy as a theological expression of divine balance, where harsh decrees require a clever counterforce. Others argue that these stories reflect tensions inside Mesopotamian society, where centralized institutions needed labor, but also depended on human skill, loyalty, and resilience. Studies from major universities such as Chicago, Oxford, and Yale often treat the myths as layered documents, combining religious imagination with the pressures of city life. You can feel those layers under your feet. In one layer, gods speak. In another, temples manage grain. In another, scribes preserve tradition. In another, ordinary humans wonder why their lives are both sacred and exhausting. Enki moves through all of them like water through soil, never staying entirely on the surface. He's not a rebel in the simple sense. That would be too easy. A loud rebel can be named, punished, and turned into a warning. Enki's method is softer and harder to stop. He works through exceptions, loopholes, dreams, advice, and gifts that appear useful before their deeper consequences are understood. He does not tear down the cosmic house. He opens windows in rooms that were meant to stay airless. This makes his sympathy more unsettling. If he truly cares for humanity, why does he not end the burden? Why does he not abolish divine demands, silence death, or lift the worker's basket forever? Perhaps because even Enki cannot undo the whole structure. Perhaps because the myths do not imagine unlimited kindness. Or perhaps because humanity's strange destiny depends on moving through hardship with memory intact. That thought is not comforting exactly. It is quieter than comfort. You stand again beside the canal, under stars bright enough to make the black water tremble. A night breeze carries the scent of reeds and cooling mud. Somewhere beyond the walls, the marshes spread into darkness. Somewhere inside the city, a family sleeps beside stored grain, trusting that morning will come with work rather than disaster. It is a small hope, but ancient people lived on small hopes with astonishing skill. Enki's plan seems to gather around such hopes. Let them learn. Let them remember. Let them survive when judgment becomes too severe. Let them carry divine order, but also carry something within themselves that cannot be fully administered. A voice, a craft, a hidden spark of interpretation. The gods may assign roles, but humans begin to ask what those roles mean. That question is dangerous. The secret plan, then, is not a map hidden under a temple floor. It is a movement inside the stories, a recurring tilt toward preservation. Enki does not announce humanity's freedom. He prepares humanity to endure long enough to discover its own inward distance from the system that made it. The labor remains, the offerings remain, the gods remain, Yet in the dark, beneath clay and sleep, another current begins to move. The flood enters the story with the patience of a nightmare. It does not need to rush. It gathers first as pressure, as rumour, as a heaviness in the air before the sky finally opens. You feel it in the old marsh country, where water is usually life, usually blessing, usually the shimmering road between reed huts, fields, and cities. Yet the same water that feeds the barley can also rise without mercy. The river smells different in this part of the memory. It smells swollen, dark, and restless. Mud loosens along the banks. Reeds lean under a wind that has forgotten how to be gentle. Birds lift suddenly from the wetlands, crying into the grey distance. The people look upward, then toward the river, then toward one another. Nobody says the worst thought aloud at first. In Sumerian and later Mesopotamian traditions, flood stories preserve one of the most powerful images in ancient literature. A great destruction is planned or permitted by the gods, while one human is secretly warned and survives. Mainstream scholarship has long studied these traditions through texts such as the Sumerian flood narrative, the Atrahasis epic, and the flood account in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Researchers at Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania have treated these stories as central witnesses to Mesopotamian ideas about divine anger, human noise, kingship, mortality, and survival. The historical fact is not that one simple global flood can be proven from the tablets. The fact is that ancient Mesopotamian literature contains several flood traditions where divine decision, human vulnerability, and secret warning come together. That combination matters. It turns catastrophe into a moral puzzle. It asks why a world would be created, burdened, organized, and then nearly washed away. You stand on a roof in the imagined city as clouds gather. The mud bricks below you hold the day's fading warmth. But the air has cooled unnaturally. The first drops strike like small pebbles. A child cries somewhere behind a reed screen. Someone pulls a goat into shelter. Someone else curses a leaking roof with admirable directness, because even apocalypse begins with household maintenance. Then the rain thickens. The flood story is where Enki's hidden sympathy becomes unmistakable. Other divine powers may unapprove destruction, or at least allow it to unfold. Humanity has become troublesome, noisy, numerous, difficult, or unbearable in the divine imagination. The details shift across texts, but the danger is clear. The human experiment is nearly ended. The labourers, singers, builders, mourners, brewers, farmers, and scribes are all brought near the edge of silence. Enki does not simply stand aside. His intervention is careful. He does not always confront the divine assembly directly, because open defiance would shatter the structure he still belongs to. Instead, he speaks through indirection. In some traditions, the warning is delivered to a wall, a reed hut, or through a dreamlike channel, allowing the chosen human to hear without the god seeming to violate the decree too plainly. It is clever, legalistic, strange, and very Enki. You can almost hear the whisper touching the reeds. Not shouted, not proclaimed, the message moves where authority is thinnest. Build, prepare, preserve life, take what must continue. A house becomes a vessel. Domestic space transforms into survival technology. The ordinary materials of settled life, timber, reed, pitch, rope, and measured instruction, become an answer to divine catastrophe. Enki does not stop the flood. He teaches someone how to pass through it. That difference is haunting. A quirky tidbit rests inside the wider flood tradition. In one Mesopotamian version, after the flood has ended, the gods gather around the sacrifice offered by the survivor with imagery that suggests hunger and relief. The divine world, having nearly destroyed its human servants, suddenly remembers that offerings are useful. One might say this is not the gods' finest administrative moment. Even heaven, apparently, can misplace the consequences section of a policy decision. The humour is faint, but the implication is serious. Humanity's destruction would also disrupt the divine order. Without people, who prepares offerings, who maintains temples, who sings the hymns, who keeps the rituals moving through time? The flood threatens humanity, but it also exposes divine dependence. The gods are powerful, Yet the system they inhabit has become tied to human continuity. That is where Enki's plan deepens. His warning does not only save a man, or a family, or animals, or skills. It preserves the bridge between heaven and earth. It ensures that the world does not return to an empty order without witnesses. The flood may erase cities, but it does not erase memory. It may drown fields, but it does not drown the possibility of rebuilding. Enki's mercy moves through preservation rather than prevention. You feel the water rising around the old world. Courtyards vanish. Doorways become dark mouths under the flood. Storage jars roll and break. Roof beams groan. The sound is immense, but also muffled, as though the world has been wrapped in wet wool. Clay tablets dissolve if unfired. Names wash from walls. Footprints blur into nothing. The city becomes water with corners beneath it. The open debate among scholars remains layered and cautious. Some researchers connect Mesopotamian flood stories with real river disasters in the alluvial plain, where unpredictable flooding shaped collective memory. Others see the flood as a literary and theological device, used to explore divine justice, overpopulation, royal legitimacy, and the fragile renewal of civilization. Archaeologists and historians from institutions such as Cambridge, Yale, and Chicago continue to distinguish between local flood evidence, mythic structure, and later literary adaptation. This debate is important because the story's truth is not only geological. A flood can be measured in silt, but also in fear. It can leave deposits in the ground and wounds in memory. Ancient people did not need a universal ocean to understand total loss. A destroyed city is a world ending for those who live inside it. A drowned field can be the collapse of a family's future. A broken irrigation system can turn order into hunger with frightening speed. So the flood before memory becomes both the event and symbol. It is the water that may have come, and the water that always waits. It is nature, divine anger, political warning, and psychological terror. It is the reminder that civilization, however proud, is made from mud beside rivers. A city can count grain, name gods, train scribes, and build platforms toward heaven. The river can still rise. In that rising, Enki's role becomes sharper than ever. He does not promise that humans will be spared from disaster. He does not turn the world into a safe garden. Instead, he creates a narrow passage through destruction. He places knowledge where one listening human can receive it. He makes survival depend on attention, craftsmanship, obedience to instruction, and trust in a message that arrives strangely. Perhaps that is the secret plan in its most ancient form. Humanity is not protected from the flood. Humanity is taught how to survive the flood. Not every loss is prevented. Not every grief is softened. Yet something continues, carried inside a vessel through the dark water, sealed against the storm by skill, warning, and fear. The rain eventually becomes a single sound. The old fields disappear beneath it. The sky and river lose their boundary. In the half-sleep of the tale, you sense a boat lifting from the ruined ground, bearing breath through a world of water. Beneath the storm, Enki's whisper has already done its work. You hear the hidden voice before you see the man who receives it. It moves through a wall, through reeds, through the thin boundary between waking and dream. The sound is not grand. It is almost too quiet for history. Yet it carries the weight of every life that may continue if one person listens closely enough. The chosen survivor is known in Sumerian tradition as Ziusudra, a name remembered through broken lines and careful reconstruction. In later Akkadian traditions, similar roles belong to Atrahasis and Utnapishtim, figures who receive warning, build a vessel, and pass through the destruction of the flood. The names differ across texts, and the stories shift as scribes copy, translate, and reshape them. Still, the central pattern remains calm and terrifying. A human hears what humanity was not meant to hear. You stand near a reed wall at night. The room is dim, lit by the weak flame of an oil lamp. Smoke stains the ceiling. The floor smells of packed earth, wool, and stored grain. Outside, The marsh wind moves with a dry rattling sound, brushing against the walls like fingers. In the darkness, the voice does not announce itself as a public command. It slips into the private space where secrets can live. The mainstream fact is firm enough to rest upon. Fragments of the Sumerian flood story preserve the figure of Ziusudra, while later Mesopotamian versions show related survivors warned before catastrophe. Scholars at institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied how these flood traditions developed through scribal transmission. They show a long literary memory rather than one simple, unchanged tale. That difference matters. It means the story breathes across centuries. It does not stand still. Each version carries the marks of its own world, while preserving the strange intimacy of the warning. A god does not gather the city in the square. A god does not order a herald to beat a drum. Instead, wisdom travels sideways, because direct speech would betray the official decree. The wall hears first. This detail feels almost playful, but only at first. The god may speak to the wall, while the human listens on the other side. It is a loophole made sacred. The command is hidden inside indirection. Enki can claim, perhaps, that he did not reveal the decision to a man. He only addressed the reeds, the wall, the house, the boundary itself. Ancient divine politics, apparently, had room for technicalities. A small smile passes through the darkness, then it fades, because the message is not decorative. It is urgent, precise, and frightening. Tear down the house, build a boat, abandon possessions, preserve life. The command overturns everything settled. Existence means a house is supposed to hold a family, not become timber for escape. Grain stores are supposed to secure the season, not be carried into a sealed vessel. The world of walls, fields, courtyards, and neighbours must be sacrificed to survive the water. You imagine Ziusudra hearing this without fully understanding its scale. His hand rests against the wall. The reed surface feels cool in the night air. A lamp flame bends, though no one has opened the door. He listens, and the known world begins to loosen. This is how catastrophe sometimes arrives. Not first as destruction, but as instruction. Build what no one else understands. There is a lonely burden in being warned. It is not the same as being saved. A warning divides a person from ordinary life. The market continues. The neighbours gossip. The temple rituals proceed. Children still chase one another under the pale morning light. Meanwhile, the warned one carries a future that has not yet happened and cannot easily be explained. He has become strange before the disaster proves him right. You feel the social weight of it. If he speaks too openly, he risks ridicule, panic, or punishment. If he stays silent, he becomes a keeper of unbearable knowledge. The old texts do not spend much time on this psychology, yet it rises naturally from the scene. The chosen human is not merely lucky. He must live for a while between obedience and isolation. A quirky tidbit from the wider Mesopotamian flood tradition gives this tension an odd human edge. In one version, the survivor is told to explain his boat building with a misleading public statement, suggesting he must leave because of divine displeasure. It is a mythic cover story, which means even the ancient apocalypse needed something like public relations. The neighbours, one imagines, were probably not convinced, but politeness can do heavy work in small communities. The humour is dry, almost dusty. Beneath it is a serious recognition. Survival may require secrecy. Enki's help does not remove danger from the human world. It places a difficult task into human hands, then requires skill, timing, and nerve. The divine whisper begins the rescue, but human action must complete it. You watch the building begin. Timber is hauled, reeds are bundled, pitch is heated until the air smells sharp and heavy. Rope cuts into palms. Instructions must be followed carefully, because one careless seam may become death when the waters rise. The vessel is not a symbol yet. It is labour, sweat, measurement, doubt, and bruised fingers. Salvation has splinters. This is where Enki's hidden plan becomes almost practical. He does not simply favour a human soul. He transmits technical knowledge. Build this, seal that, gather these, wait. The rescue is not magic alone. It is divine information turned into craft. The human survives because wisdom crosses the boundary between God and worker. An open scholarly debate asks how these flood survivors should be understood. Some researchers see Ziusudra and related figures as mythic ancestors of kingship, preserving human order through divine favor. Others view them as literary embodiments of the wise servant, the one who listens correctly and restores ritual life after disaster. Scholars from Chicago, Yale, and Oxford have also explored how these stories compare with flood traditions across the wider ancient Near East. No single explanation exhausts the figure. That uncertainty suits him. Ziusudra belongs to the mist between history, myth, kingship, and memory. He's not described like a modern hero with private feelings fully exposed. He is more like a vessel himself. Through him, the tradition carries survival. Through his listening, humanity continues to speak. You stand beside him as clouds begin to mass beyond the fields. The air grows charged and metallic. Animals become restless. The river seems too full, too dark, too aware. In the distance, the city still believes in mourning. The baker still prepares dough. The scribe still shapes signs. The guard still leans at the gate, probably bored, because guards in all ages have perfected that ancient art. But Ziusudra has heard the wall. He knows that the ordinary surface of life is thinning. Behind it stands a divine decision already made, and against it only a whispered exception. Enki's voice has not stopped the storm. It has created a listener strong enough to carry the future through it. The hidden voice fades. The lamp burns low. The reed wall is only a wall again, rough beneath the hand, smelling of marsh and dust. Yet nothing is the same. A secret has crossed into human keeping. A man must now build against the disbelief of the world, trusting a God who speaks through boundaries. In the silence, you understand the terrifying tenderness of that moment. Humanity is not rescued by power alone. Humanity is rescued by hearing, by remembering, and by acting before the sky confirms the warning. The first ark is built in the mind before it is built in wood, and somewhere beneath the deep, Enki waits to see whether the human has understood. Knowledge arrives as mercy, but it does not arrive clean. It comes carrying tools, names, measures, songs, and dangers hidden inside usefulness. You feel this as the storm memory settles into something wider, something woven through the whole Sumerian vision of humanity. Enki does not merely warn. He gives skills by which fragile beings become builders of a world. The morning air over the city smells of wet clay, oven smoke, crushed reeds, and sheep wool warmed by the sun. A worker kneels beside a canal gate, testing the mud with his fingers. A potter turns a vessel that will carry grain, oil, or beer. A singer practices a temple hymn under her breath. A scribe moistens a lump of clay, then presses the first sign with the confidence of someone who believes marks can hold reality still. That belief is almost magical. In the Mesopotamian imagination, civilization is not just a pile of inventions. It is a set of ordered powers, sacred patterns, and useful arts that allow life to become stable. Enki is deeply associated with these powers. He belongs to the world of craft, wisdom, ritual speech, purification, and clever arrangement. His gifts help humans live, but they also bind humans more tightly to the systems they create. A mainstream historical fact gives this idea firm ground. Cuneiform writing first developed in southern Mesopotamia for administrative purposes, then expanded into literature, law, ritual, mathematics, astronomy, and education. Scholars from Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania have shown how writing transformed temple management, royal authority, trade, scholarship, and memory. The same marks that counted grain eventually preserved myths about gods, kings, or floods, grief, and creation. You can feel the transformation in one damp tablet. At first, it may record sheep, barley, workers, or jars. Then, across centuries, the same writing system carries prayers, laments, school jokes, royal boasting, medical recipes, and stories of the deep. The tool made for accounting becomes a vessel for imagination. That is one of history's quieter miracles. Humanity invents paperwork, then accidentally opens a doorway into eternity. Typical, really. The mercy of knowledge is obvious. With writing, people remember beyond one lifetime. With irrigation, they draw food from a difficult plain. With measurement, they build, trade, divide, and plan. With ritual, they give shape to fear. With law, however imperfect, they try to restrain chaos. With story, they make suffering speak. Each gift pushes back against helplessness, yet each gift also creates a new burden. Writing can preserve truth, but also enforce debt. Irrigation can feed cities, but also demand constant labor. Measurement can bring fairness, but also sharpen taxation. Ritual can comfort, but also control. Law can protect, but also punish. Story can heal, but also justify power. Enki's gifts are double-edged, though not in a loud way. They cut softly, over generations. You stand inside a scribal school, where knowledge is treated like treasure and punishment with roughly equal enthusiasm. The clay floor is dusty, the room is hot. Young students copy lists of signs, professions, animals, stones, city, gods, and phrases. Their fingers ache. Their tablets go wrong. A teacher corrects them with the ancient confidence of someone who has never made a mistake. At least not recently. The quirky tidbit here is very human. Some Mesopotamian school texts include complaints about student life, stern teachers, poor handwriting, and the difficult climb toward scribal status. Across thousands of years, the voice of the student survives with almost comic familiarity. Apparently, one of the earliest engines of civilization was a tired learner, wondering why the assignment had to be so long. Still, the school matters. It is one of the places where Enki's secret mercy becomes institutional. Knowledge must be taught. It must pass from hand to hand. It must survive boredom, mistakes, discipline, ambition, and dust. A divine gift is not useful if it cannot be copied. A warning dies if no one remembers how to write it down. There is tenderness in that, and a little dread. Because once knowledge can be copied, it can also escape its first purpose. A myth told in one temple can travel to another city. A ritual formula can be adapted. A royal inscription can be read by enemies. A proverb can outlive the authority that tried to control it. Writing seems obedient when the scribe presses it. But history teaches that written words have a habit of wandering. Perhaps Enki knows this. Perhaps that is why his gifts feel like forbidden mercy. They do not break humanity out of the divine system, but they create depth within human life. A worker who knows only the day's task remains visible and manageable. A worker who belongs to a culture of memory becomes harder to reduce. That person carries songs, ancestors, contracts, omens, jokes, grievances, techniques, and prayers. The human being becomes an archive with a pulse. An open debate among scholars asks whether Mesopotamian wisdom gods primarily reflect religious ideas, scribal identity, or the practical authority of specialist professions. Some researchers argue that figures like Enki express the sacred power of technical knowledge within early cities. Others emphasize mythic themes of fertility, creation, and cosmic order tied to water and purification. Scholars from major universities have explored both sides because ancient symbols rarely behave like obedient museum labels. You sense this complexity in the marketplace. A metalworker hammers copper into shape, each strike ringing against morning noise. A weaver pulls thread through a loom with steady patience. A brewer checks jars in the shade. A healer prepares substances whose names sound ordinary and mysterious at once. A merchant weighs goods brought from far places, perhaps stone, timber, shell, or metal. Each craft extends human reach beyond the body. The body remains fragile. That is the central tension. Enki's knowledge does not make humans immortal. It does not stop grief from entering courtyards. It does not stop infants from dying, fields from failing, kings from demanding, or storms from returning. The gifts are real, but limited. They make human beings capable of endurance, not escape. They teach people how to build roofs under a sky that may still fall. In the quietest part of the thought, knowledge itself becomes a kind of burdened awakening. Once humans understand patterns, they also understand loss. Once they remember, they also mourn. Once they measure time, they feel its passing. Once they write names, they know names can vanish. The gift that preserves also reveals how much is always slipping away. That is why Enki's mercy feels forbidden. It gives humanity enough light to see the walls. You sit in the low glow of an oil lamp while a scribe finishes a tablet. The stylus makes tiny sounds against clay, soft clicks like insects in the dark. Outside, the city settles into its breathing rhythm. Grain is stored, doors are barred, prayers are murmured. Somewhere, canal water moves under starlight, carrying silt from one field to another. The tablet dries slowly, its signs harden. A thought has been rescued from the vanishing air and given a small clay body. Perhaps it records a ration. Perhaps it records a hymn. Perhaps it records a God's secret kindness in language careful enough to survive kings, conquest, fire, and neglect. Enki's plan, if it can be felt here, is not a simple rescue from servitude. It is the slow planting of capacities, craft, memory, ritual, speech, writing. The human creature remains bound to earth, but now earth itself can speak through human hands. Clay remembers, water teaches, labor becomes record, fear becomes prayer, survival becomes culture. And culture, once awakened, is difficult to drown. The divine council gathers like a storm that has learned to sit in silence. You are not inside a human courtroom, though the feeling is familiar enough to be uncomfortable. There are ranks, voices, claims, old privileges, and decisions that will fall upon people who never hear the debate. Power often works that way. It speaks in high rooms, then arrives as hunger in the street. In the Mesopotamian imagination, the gods do not form a simple family of kindly figures, watching over humanity with equal concern. They appear as a structured society, filled with senior powers, lesser divine beings, messengers, judges, warriors, mothers, scribes, gatekeepers, and rulers of terrifying domains. Their world has order, but it also has strain. It has hierarchy, but also argument. It has decrees, but also loopholes, which is where Enki becomes especially interesting. You sense the council as a vast chamber beyond ordinary sight. The air is cool, unlike the fields below. The floor shines faintly like polished stone after rain. Lamps burn without smoke. Somewhere, water moves in a channel too dark to see. The gods sit according to rank, and every position means something. No one is merely present. Everyone belongs to the architecture of authority. A mainstream historical fact gives this vision its roots. Mesopotamian texts describe a divine assembly where major gods deliberate and issue decisions affecting kings, cities, nature, and humanity. Scholars from Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied how this divine assembly reflects both religious imagination and the political structures of ancient city-states. The gods are cosmic beings, but their councils often resemble the organized decision-making of human societies. That resemblance is not accidental. Human beings imagine power using the shapes they know. A city with elders, rulers, officials, scribes, and temple authorities can imagine heaven as a greater city. A land of competing city-states can imagine gods with competing jurisdictions. A society built on decrees, oaths, property, and obligation can imagine fate as something issued, sealed, and recorded. The divine council becomes both sacred vision and social mirror. You stand below that mirror, in a city where orders move downward like water through canals. A command from a palace or temple becomes a ration list, a labor summons, a tax claim, a boundary dispute, or a military levy. Most people do not see the first conversation. They feel the outcome in their backs, fields, stomachs, and sleep. The gods, in myth, make this experience cosmic. Enki's place inside this council is never dull. He is powerful, but not always supreme. He is wise, but not always obedient in the expected way. He understands the decrees, the sacred powers, the delicate balance between divine honor and practical survival. He knows that a decision can be formally correct and still nearly ruin everything. This, perhaps, is why he so often appears as the figure who adjusts what others declare. That is a dangerous talent. You can picture a decree forming in the council like a tablet being pressed into permanence. The senior gods agree. A boundary is set. A punishment is approved. A fate is assigned. The official order seems solid, yet Enki studies its edge, its wording, its silence, its unintended consequences. He does not always smash the tablet. He finds the soft clay before it dries. There is gentle mischief in that image, but also profound unease. If humanity depends on divine loopholes, then human survival is never fully secure. It hangs between decree and interpretation. It rests not only on justice, but on whether wisdom can soften power quickly enough. Enki's secret plan begins to look less like a rebellion and more like a counter-administration inside creation itself. The quirky tidbit here comes from the strange richness of Mesopotamian divine bureaucracy. Some gods held roles that sound almost like cosmic offices, including divine scribes who recorded decisions, messenger gods who carried commands, and gatekeepers who controlled passage into sacred or underworld spaces. Ancient heaven, it seems, had departments somewhere. One imagines. A divine clerk was very proud of the filing system. The humor is mild, but the structure is serious. Mesopotamian religion often treated order as something maintained through correct roles. The god of the storm had a function. The sun god had a function. The underworld powers had functions. The mother goddess, the warrior goddess, the moon god, the grain goddess, the scribal deities, and the wisdom god all belonged to a system. Nothing was random. Even terror had a title. You feel how this system presses upon humanity. A farmer prays not to an abstract universe, but to powers with names and responsibilities. A king claims legitimacy because the gods have granted rule. A city suffers defeat, and the loss may be explained as divine abandonment or anger. A plague, drought, flood, or failed harvest becomes more than misfortune. It becomes a message from the invisible administration of reality. This is not a casual belief. It shapes choices, rituals, fears, and obedience. If divine order stands behind human order, then challenging the temple or king can feel like challenging the structure of the world. Yet myths about disagreement among the gods complicate that authority. If the divine council itself can be divided, then power is not perfectly smooth. There are tensions in heaven. There are arguments behind fate. An open scholarly debate follows this very point. Some historians argue that divine assemblies in Mesopotamian literature reinforce political hierarchy by projecting human institutions onto the cosmos. Others suggest that these stories also expose the instability of authority, showing that even divine decisions require negotiation, persuasion, and correction. Researchers from Yale, Stanford, Oxford, and Chicago have examined these myths as both religious texts and reflections of early complex societies. You can hold both possibilities at once. The council legitimizes order, and it reveals order's fragility. It makes kingship sacred, and it shows that decrees can be contested. It places humanity beneath heaven, and it leaves room for a god like Enki to protect what the official system might sacrifice. That room is narrow, but history often survives in narrow rooms. You hear the city outside the imagined council. Wheels creak over packed earth. A bronze tool rings in a workshop. Priests chant in a temple courtyard. A woman pours water into a jar, watching the surface tremble. None of these people see the divine argument, yet all of them live under its shadow. Their world depends on decisions made beyond their reach, just as many human worlds have always depended on distant powers. Enki's secret plan becomes clearer in the contrast. He does not stand outside the council as a simple enemy. He belongs to it. He understands its language, respects its forms, and uses its structures. That makes him more effective than an outsider. He can alter outcomes from within the machinery of fate. He can warn without announcing treason. He can preserve humanity while still appearing to uphold the balance of heaven. Perhaps the plan requires exactly this position. Not open war against divine order, but a patient resistance to its excesses. Not the end of hierarchy, but the insertion of mercy where hierarchy becomes deadly. Not liberation in a modern sense, but survival inside a world that keeps demanding service. The thought is quiet and not entirely comforting. Humanity remains small beneath the council. Human cities remain vulnerable to decisions they cannot hear. Yet the myths do not leave humans completely alone. Somewhere in the assembly sits a god who knows that systems can destroy what they need. Somewhere, wisdom listens when power becomes too clean, too severe, too certain of itself. The chamber fades into darkness. The lamps burn lower. The divine voices become distant, like thunder beyond flat fields. Below, the human city continues with its ovens, ledgers, prayers, and sleeping children. The council may decree, but the deep water remembers another responsibility. And in that hidden remembering, Enki's plan moves forward without needing to be named. Humanity learns to endure in the soaked silence after disaster has passed. The water withdraws, but it does not return everything. It leaves mud on thresholds, broken reeds tangled in doorways, dead fields under a skin of silt, and a smell that is both fertile and mournful. You stand in that smell now, where the world feels newly made and badly wounded. The sky is pale, almost innocent. That seems rude of it. Across the plain, the old order is hidden under damp earth. A wall has collapsed into itself. A jar lies half buried, its mouth filled with grey water. Footprints appear and vanish in soft ground. Birds return first, stepping carefully through the shallows, as if inspecting the damage with official concern. Then people return, quieter than before, carrying tools, children, bundles, and the heavy knowledge that survival is not the same as peace. In Mesopotamian tradition, the world after catastrophe does not remain empty. Human life begins again through labor, ritual, memory, and renewed connection with the gods. Mainstream historical study of southern Mesopotamia confirms that floods, canal failures, droughts, and shifting river courses repeatedly shaped settlement patterns and agricultural life. Research from major institutions such as Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania has shown how resilience depended on irrigation repair, food distribution, local organization, and long memory. That fact is plain, and it is profound. Ancient people did not endure because the world was gentle. They endured because they learned how to repair what the world kept breaking. This is not glamorous endurance. It is not a shining sword raised beneath the lightning. It is a shovel in wet mud, a roof patched badly but quickly, a ration shared, a child carried over foul water, a seed pressed into uncertain ground. You watch them begin again? A man clears reeds from a canal mouth. A woman lifts damp grain from a ruined storage jar and sighs through her teeth. A priest washes a small shrine vessel, speaking softly, perhaps to the god, perhaps to himself. A scribe examines tablets that were fired hard enough to survive and others softened into silence. Records, like people, have different luck. The rebuilt city is not only a place, it is an argument against disappearance. Every brick set back into a wall says that life will not be reduced to one disaster. Every field reopened says that hunger has not won yet. Every offering placed before a divine statue says that the old relationship, however strained, continues. The gods may have nearly ended the human story, but humans keep behaving as if the story still matters. This is where Enki's plan becomes less dramatic and more demanding. The warning saves life, but endurance requires repetition. It requires people to wake again and carry water, grind grain, rebuild dikes, soothe frightened animals, settle disputes, and restore trust in a world that has shown its teeth. A secret plan for humanity cannot depend only on one miraculous escape. It must live in the ordinary stubbornness that follows. The quirky tidbit here rests in the humble clay brick. Ancient Mesopotamians built much of their world from mud brick, which sounds fragile until you remember they created cities, temples, walls, houses, platforms, and archives from earth mixed with water and straw. Their architecture was basically organized mud with ambition. To be fair, it performed better than many modern plans created in conference rooms. Mud brick is a perfect emblem for human endurance. It is made from the same substance that floods can dissolve. It must be repaired constantly. It is vulnerable to rain, neglect, and time. Yet it can rise into monumental forms when shaped by many hands. The material is weak alone and powerful in pattern. That could almost describe humanity in the Sumerian imagination. You run your fingers across an imagined brick. It feels rough, dry on the surface, still faintly cool inside. Someone shaped it in a mold, turned it under the sun, and carried it to a wall. That person may never have seen the completed building, yet their labor remained inside it. After catastrophe, the same kind of labor begins again, patient and anonymous. Endurance is not only physical, it is also narrative. People need to know what happened, why it happened, and how to live with the fear that it could happen again. This is where myth performs its quiet work. It gives disaster a structure. It does not erase grief, but it prevents grief from becoming meaningless. A flood becomes a divine crisis, a secret warning, a survival, a new beginning. The waters are remembered inside a story that can be told without drowning each listener anew. An open scholarly debate asks how much these stories preserve memories of real environmental shocks, and how much they serve theological or political purposes. Some historians emphasize river behavior, local flooding, and the vulnerability of irrigation societies. Others focus on how flood narratives justify renewed kingship, ritual order, and the dependence of humans on divine favor. Researchers from Oxford, Stanford, Chicago, and Yale have treated the matter carefully. Because myth can remember events while also transforming them. You do not need to choose only one meaning. A story can be many vessels at once. It can hold silt and theology, fear and administration, grief and political order. It can teach a farmer to respect water, a king to claim divine sanction, a priest to restore ritual, and a child to understand why old people grow quiet when clouds gather too thickly. The city after disaster becomes a school of memory, not a neat school with tablets and recitations, but a living school of scarred walls and altered habits. People learn where water rose. They remember which grain stores failed. They mark which families vanished and which fields returned first. They remember who shared bread and who hid it. Disaster reveals character with unpleasant efficiency. Enki's mercy lives inside that learning. He gives more than survival. He gives the conditions under which survival can become wisdom. Humanity does not only crawl from the flood and continue blindly. Humanity compares, adapts, records, ritualizes, and teaches. The next canal may be stronger. The next storehouse may be higher. The next prayer may carry a different trembling inside it. You hear tools striking mud in slow rhythm. A group repairs an embankment, their legs sunk to the ankle. The sound is soft, repetitive, almost sleepy. A child watches from the bank, learning without being told that civilization is something adults rebuild while pretending not to be afraid. Nearby, an elder describes the old waterline with one hand raised against a wall. That gesture becomes history. Humanity endures because it can carry invisible marks. The flood line remains in memory after the mud is scrubbed away. The lost names remain in songs after the bodies are gone. The warning remains in myth after the voice has faded. Human beings become vessels themselves, carrying what cannot be stored in jars or pressed into one tablet. The rebuilt world is not innocent. It has learned too much for innocence. Yet it is alive. And in the Sumerian vision, life after disaster is never casual. It is permitted, protected, and burdened. Enki's secret plan seems to allow humanity this grave privilege, not to escape history, but to become historical, to live, remember, suffer, repair, and pass meaning forward. The sun lowers over the wet plain. Smoke rises from new hearths. The first evening meal after return tastes of ash, hunger, and relief. Someone laughs too loudly, then falls quiet. Somewhere, a small offering is placed before a god whose mercy is still difficult to understand. And beneath the cooling earth, the deep water waits without speaking. Priests preserve the fragments because fragile things often outlive monuments. A palace can burn, A king can fall. A city wall can crack into the plain and become a low mound under goat tracks. Yet a small clay tablet, dried by sun or hardened by accident, can wait for thousands of years with a patience no empire ever managed. You enter the scribble world softly, through a doorway half lit by morning. The room smells of clay, dust, oil smoke, and reed fibres. Low benches line the walls. Fresh tablets sit in rows like sleeping loaves. A teacher moves slowly among students, listening to the scratch of styluses. The sound is small, almost insect-like, but it carries cities inside it. Here, Enki's plan becomes less like a secret spoken once and more like a current flowing through schools, archives, and temple rooms. The whispered mercy of the deep waters must become memory, or else it vanishes. A warning not preserved becomes only air. A myth not copied becomes silence. So human hands do the quiet work that gods alone do not finish. They press signs into clay. A mainstream historical fact gives this scene real weight. Archaeologists excavating Mesopotamian sites such as Nippur uncovered large collections of school tablets, literary compositions, lexical lists, hymns, myths, and administrative texts. Research connected with the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago has shown that scribal education preserved older Sumerian language and literature long after everyday speech had shifted in many places. That fact is extraordinary. Sumerian became, in part, a learned language, studied and copied by scribes who treated it as a gateway to tradition, ritual, and authority. The words of ancient gods survived because later students kept repeating them. Some probably yawned while doing it. This may be one of history's most honest miracles. Sacred memory often depends on tired students. You sit beside one of them in imagination. His hands are damp from shaping clay. His back aches from leaning forward. He copies a list of signs, then a proverb, then a passage from an old composition whose meaning feels larger than the room. His teacher corrects an error. The student smooths the tablet and begins again. Knowledge enters the body through repetition, boredom, discipline, and embarrassment. The temple archive is nearby, cooler and darker. Shelves, baskets, or storage rooms hold tablets grouped by use. Some record offerings, workers, animals, land, and rations. Others preserve prayers, rituals, omens, medical instructions, royal inscriptions, and myths. The archive is not a modern library with quiet carpets and forgiving lighting. It is a working memory machine tied to economy, worship, law, and power. You sense the seriousness of storage. A tablet can prove that grain was delivered. A tablet can preserve the name of a field. A tablet can authorize a transaction. A tablet can keep a hymn available for a ritual night. A tablet can hold the tale of a god who saves humanity by speaking through a wall. Clay becomes authority because memory becomes enforceable. That is both beautiful and dangerous. In this world, priests and scribes do not merely record belief, they shape how belief survives. A myth copied in a school can become part of a learned identity. A ritual text preserved in a temple can guide how people speak to divine power. A damaged tablet can make later scholars argue for generations, which is possibly what the tablet wanted all along. Clay has a mischievous afterlife. The quirky tidbit here is wonderfully intimate. Some school tablets include corrections, awkward writing, uneven signs, and practice exercises that look almost painfully human. A great myth might survive beside a clumsy student copy of a sign list. Imagine the secret plan of Enki preserved partly because someone's homework was abandoned, baked, buried, and accidentally made immortal. History has a strange sense of humour, yet the humour does not weaken the sacred atmosphere. It reveals the human machinery beneath it. Traditions do not survive in pure light. They survive through copying, teaching, storing, misreading, repairing, arguing, and copying again. They survive because institutions care, and because individuals keep doing repetitive work when no one in the room can imagine a museum thousands of years away. You walk deeper into the archive. The air feels still. Dust softens every surface. Tablets rest with their edges chipped, their corners broken, their signs sometimes clear and sometimes blurred. Some are complete enough to speak in long sentences. Others offer only a name, a phrase, a divine title, a broken verb. The missing parts feel almost louder than the surviving words. This is where Enki's plan becomes coded by damage. The story does not come to the modern listener whole. It comes through fragments, duplicates, late copies, variant traditions, and scholarly reconstruction. One tablet preserves a beginning but loses the ending. Another holds the ending but breaks where motive might have been. A third offers a phrase that changes the tone of everything, provided the reading is correct. You feel the humility required here. Ancient texts do not simply reveal, they resist. They demand patience. They make scholars compare signs, dialects, copies, context, and damaged surfaces. They force the living to admit uncertainty before the dead. That may be one of their greatest gifts. An open scholarly debate surrounds the role of scribble schools in shaping Sumerian literary tradition. Some researchers argue that many surviving compositions reflect school culture and elite education as much as ancient public religion. Others emphasize that school copies still preserve older temple traditions, ritual ideas, and mythic memories. Scholars from Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and Pennsylvania continue to examine how education, religion, and administration overlap in the tablet record. Both sides reveal something important. The texts are not transparent windows, but they are not empty inventions. They are worked materials like bricks. Human hands shape them from older clay, sometimes following inherited molds, sometimes altering the form. When you listen to them, you hear the old myth and the later classroom at once. That double sound is haunting. A priest enters the imagined room carrying a small lamp. Flame trembles against the tablet faces. He is not preserving fragments for your benefit, though you happen to receive them. He is preserving a usable sacred world. The hymns must be available. The rituals must be correct. The gods' names must be known. The old stories must remain close enough to guide the present. And perhaps, hidden inside that work, the memory of Enki's mercy continues, not as a forbidden manifesto, not as a single secret document with dramatic seals and suspiciously convenient labels. It continues as a pattern in the archive. The God of wisdom gives. The God of deep waters warns. The God who belongs to order also bends order toward survival. A tablet does not need to explain that aloud. It only needs to be copied. You imagine the final moments of a school day. Students stack tablets to dry. The teacher inspects them with weary satisfaction. Outside, the city returns to evening noise. Donkeys complain, ovens smoke, and someone argues about barley in a tone suggesting this argument has deep ancestral roots. The sacred and ordinary remain inseparable, as they always have in this world. A young scribe carries a tablet carefully, leaving thumbprints near the edge. He does not know that his small act may outlast dynasties. He does not know that distant readers will one day lean over photographs, transliterations, and museum cases, trying to hear the old waters through broken clay. He simply preserves the lesson. That is enough. In the darkness of the archive, the fragments sleep. They hold divine names, human obligations, flood memories, offerings, laments, and half-hidden designs. They do not answer every question. They keep the question alive. And for a story as old as Enki's, that may be the most powerful preservation of all. The debate beneath the myth begins in a quieter room than the story itself. No flood roars here. No divine council gathers in shining severity. Instead, there are tables, lamps, photographs, excavation notes, sign lists, dictionaries, and scholars leaning over broken clay with the patience of people who know that certainty must be earned slowly. You enter that room as the evening settles outside the windows. The air smells faintly of paper, dust, coffee, and old cardboard boxes. A tablet rests under careful light, its surface scarred, its signs shallow in places, sharp in others. It looks small enough to fit inside two hands. Yet inside that little object are gods, workers, rivers, kings, fear, humour, and the unfinished problem of human purpose. The question is simple to ask and difficult to answer. What are these stories really doing? One mainstream fact is important here. Modern Assyriology studies Sumerian and Akkadian texts through language, archaeology, history, religion, and comparative literature. Scholars connected with Oxford, Yale, Chicago, Pennsylvania, Harvard, and other major research institutions have spent generations reading these tablets against excavated evidence, scribal practice, and the social world of ancient Mesopotamia. Their work shows that myth is never only myth in the thin sense, it is a cultural instrument. That does not make the stories false, it makes them dense. A myth can explain ritual, justify authority, preserve memory, teach values, entertain listeners, encode political anxiety, and ask questions no legal document can safely ask. The same story can serve a temple, comfort a family, warn a ruler, and trouble a future reader. Clay is small, but meaning is not. You look again at Enki's pattern. He creates, advises, protects, conceals, reveals, and bends rules without breaking the whole order. To one scholar, this may express theology, a way of imagining wisdom as the balancing force inside divine power. To another, it may reflect the social position of learned specialists, those scribes and priests whose knowledge allowed cities to function. To another, it may preserve older memories of flood, labour, and environmental danger. None of these readings has to devour the others. The first debate asks whether the text should be read primarily as sacred literature. In that view, Enki belongs to a living religious universe. He's not merely a symbol for irrigation or scribal class. He is a divine personality within a system of worship, ritual, and cosmic order. His waters purify, his wisdom protects, his magic restores balance when the world strains toward chaos. This reading has power because the ancient people themselves did not treat the gods as decorative metaphors. They fed them, dressed them, praised them, feared them, and built cities around their houses. The divine was woven into the practical world so tightly that separating religion from administration would have seemed rather modern, and perhaps rather strange. The temple ledger and the hymn belong to the same civilization. Then another debate opens, softer but persistent. Perhaps Enki's stories also reflect the social structure of early urban life. A god of wisdom, craft, ritual, and deep knowledge might mirror the authority of specialists who knew what others did not. Scribes could read, priests knew ceremonies, healers knew substances and incantations, administrators knew measures, rations, and obligations. Knowledge was not only sacred, it was institutional power. That thought makes the tablet feel heavier. If Enki represents knowledge, then his secret plan may also reflect the ambivalence of knowledge in society. It can protect humanity, but it can also organize labor. It can preserve memory, but it can record debt. It can soften catastrophe, but it can strengthen hierarchy. The ancient stories may be asking whether wisdom serves life, or whether life becomes trapped inside wisdom's systems. A quirky tidbit hides in the scholarly world itself. Assyriologists sometimes identify tiny differences between wedge-shaped signs that can change the reading of a line. A damaged mark may turn certainty into a polite academic quarrel lasting decades. This means that, in a very real sense, an ancient scribe's slightly tired hand can still ruin a modern scholar's afternoon. Clay keeps its jokes dry, yet those tiny marks matter deeply. A single verb can change whether a god commands, advises, laments, or deceives. A missing line can hide motive. A variant copy can suggest that later scribes understood the story differently. The debate is not distant from the myth. It is part of how the myth continues to live. The open scholarly dispute around the flood traditions is especially rich. Some researchers examine whether river floods, shoreline changes, or regional disasters helped shape the stories. Others focus on a literary design, asking how the flood dramatizes divine anger, human excess, and the restoration of order. Still others compare Mesopotamian flood narratives with later traditions across the ancient Near East, noting similarities, differences, borrowings, and transformations. You notice how carefully the best scholars move. They do not need to flatten mystery into one answer. They ask what can be known from archaeology. what can be inferred from texts, and what must remain uncertain. This restraint can feel less exciting than wild certainty, but it is far more respectful of the dead. The ancient world deserves patience, not a costume party of easy conclusions. There is another debate beneath all of this. Are the stories echoes of older catastrophes, or are they structured reflections on civilization itself? The answer may be both, but in different degrees. A people living beside powerful rivers would remember water's danger. A society built on labor would imagine creation through labor. A culture ruled by temples and kings would picture heaven as organized authority. A civilization haunted by mortality would create stories where survival is granted, limited, and strange. You stand at the edge of these possibilities. The tablet does not solve them for you. It does something better. It keeps them in tension. In one reading, Enki's plan is theological mercy. In another, it is the wisdom of institutions preserving the human workforce they require. In another, it is a poetic memory of how communities survive ecological collapse. In another, it is the ancient mind asking why human beings suffer, build, remember, and continue. Each reading opens a different door. None closes the house. The room grows dimmer. A scholar adjusts a lamp. The clay surface catches light along its broken ridges. Dust settles slowly, as if time itself has become visible. You begin to understand that the debate is not a distraction from the myth. It is the modern form of listening. The ancient scribe pressed signs. The modern reader presses questions. Both acts are fragile. Perhaps the deepest truth is that the Sumerian stories do not belong only to one category. They are not simply history, not simply fiction, not simply religion, not simply politics, and not simply memory. They are the place where all those human needs meet. They show a civilization thinking through its own existence with the materials it had. Gods, rivers, labor, clay, hunger, fear, and hope. Enki remains difficult because wisdom remains difficult. The god who saves may also arrange the system that requires saving. The gift that frees may also bind. The flood that destroys may also renew. Humanity may be created for service, yet become capable of asking what service means. The debate beneath the myth is really the debate beneath civilization. The tablet lies still under the lamp. It does not defend itself. It does not simplify itself. It waits, as it has always waited just, for someone to lean close enough to hear uncertainty breathing inside the signs. Enki's plan begins to look different when you stop searching for a single hidden order. It is not a carved tablet buried beneath a shrine, waiting to announce the secret of everything. It is not a simple rescue, and it is not a simple trick. It is more unsettling than either of those things. It is a long experiment in what human beings can become when they are given memory inside a world of limits. You feel this idea slowly, like warmth returning to stone after sunrise. The city is awake again, but not loudly. Smoke lifts from ovens. Sandals scrape across packed earth. A woman lifts water from a jar and pours it into a basin. The sound is clear, cool, and brief. In that small pouring, the whole symbol returns. Water gives life, but it also disappears through the fingers. Enki's gifts work the same way. They cannot be held without change. A mainstream historical fact helps steady the thought. Mesopotamian culture preserved complex traditions about creation, kingship, craft, law, ritual, and wisdom across many centuries of scribal activity. Research from major institutions such as Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania has shown that these texts were copied, studied, adapted, and interpreted by learned communities. The Sumerian world did not simply vanish. It became a foundation inside later Mesopotamian memory. That continuity matters because Enki's role is not trapped in one moment. He belongs to the beginning, but he also belongs to transmission. He is linked with the first shaping of humans, with the ordering of culture, with the warning before destruction, and with the arts that allow people to persist. His plan, if the word still feels useful, stretches through time as a pattern of guarded awakening. You walk through a workshop where the morning light falls across tools. A carpenter smooths wood imported from far beyond the southern plain. A lapidary turns a stone bead between careful fingers. A reed worker binds mats. A scribe checks a list. None of them looks like a philosopher in the grand style. Yet each is thinking through matter. Each takes something resistant and gives it form. This is consciousness at work. Not abstract and floating above life, but embodied in hands, habits, mistakes, and skill. A potter learns the temper of clay. A farmer learns the moods of soil. A healer learns which substances soothe and which frighten the patient more than the illness. A scribe learns that one wrong sign can create a surprising amount of trouble. Through these arts, humans become more than labouring bodies. They become interpreters of the world. That may be Enki's most dangerous gift, interpretation. A servant can follow instructions. An interpreter asks why the instruction exists. A worker can clear a canal. An interpreter notices who benefits from the water. A singer can repeat a hymn. An interpreter hears sorrow hidden inside praise. A scribe can copy a myth. An interpreter wonders why the god of wisdom protects humanity only after helping place humanity within burden. The quirky tidbit here rests in Enki's reputation for clever speech. In several traditions, he does not overcome problems through brute force, but through verbal skill, ritual knowledge, and strategic ambiguity. He is the divine master of the loophole, the sacred side door, the well-timed phrase. If heaven had contracts, Enki would be the one reading the small print while everyone else admired the seal. There is humour in that picture, but also a deeper unease. Language can liberate, and language can bind. A decree can condemn, a spell can heal. A contract can protect one person while trapping another. A myth can preserve truth while disguising it. Enki's domain includes this double nature of words. He knows that speech is never harmless once it enters history. You hear the city speaking everywhere. Bargains in the market, chants in the temple, instructions in the field, lullabies in courtyards, complaints near the ration office. Words pass from mouth to mouth, light and invisible, yet they shape labour, faith, fear, and desire. Writing hardens some of those words into clay, but speech remains the living current. If Enki's plan is an experiment in human consciousness, then language is one of its vessels. Through language, humans do not merely react to suffering. They name it, they compare it, they place it inside stories. They ask whether a flood is punishment, accident, memory, or warning. They ask whether labour is duty, exploitation, destiny, or sacred service. They ask quietly at first whether the gods themselves disagree. That question changes the human creature. An open, scholarly debate continues around whether Mesopotamian myths primarily stabilize social order or allow reflection on its tensions. Some historians argue that myths about divine creation and human labor reinforce the legitimacy of temples, kings, and hierarchy. Others suggest that the same myths expose the strain within those systems, allowing ancient audiences to consider divine conflict, human suffering, and the ambiguity of power. Scholars at Stanford, Yale, Oxford, and Chicago have explored this tension from historical, literary, and archaeological perspectives. The debate feels alive because the texts do both. They stabilize and disturb. They explain why the world is arranged as it is, but also show that the arrangement is not painless. They place humans under the gods, but give humans enough awareness to feel the weight of that position. That is not a small thing. A creature that can feel the shape of its cage is already more than a tool. You pause beside a temple wall at dusk. Its bricks are warm beneath your palm. The surface is rough, marked by straw impressions and time. Above you, the sky turns copper, then violet. A priest carries a lamp toward an inner room. A child asks a question no adult can answer neatly. The city continues. But under the continuation there is thought. Perhaps Enki never planned to free humanity in the simple sense. Perhaps freedom was not the category the ancient stories were reaching for. They speak instead of preservation, craft, adaptation, and awareness. They imagine humans as made for service, yet strangely capable of receiving divine knowledge. The contradiction does not disappear, it deepens. This is why the secret plan begins to resemble an experiment. What happens when mortal workers learn to write? What happens when beings made for burden become keepers of memory? What happens when people who feed the gods begin to preserve stories in which gods depend on them? What happens when survival becomes culture, and culture becomes reflection? The answer is humanity, not humanity as triumph. Bright and certain, humanity as a slow, unfinished emergence from mud, water, labour, and speech. Humanity as the being that suffers and then asks what suffering means. Humanity as the creature that builds temples, complains about rations, copies divine myths, buries its dead, repairs canals, and leaves tablets for strangers beneath another sky. You sense Enki watching this not with simple kindness, but with grave interest. He does not give humans everything. He gives them enough skill to build, enough memory to mourn, enough language to question, enough imagination to suspect that the official story is never the whole story. This is mercy, but it is also risk, because once humanity awakens, it cannot become unaware again. The evening deepens, water moves quietly through a canal, reflecting the first stars. In the houses, people light lamps and close doors, clay tablets dry on shelves. Somewhere, a scribe finishes a line about a god who keeps secrets in the deep. The signs are small. The idea is immense. Enki's plan is no longer only about saving life from a flood. It is about making life capable of carrying meaning through every flood that follows. The human story becomes the vessel. Memory becomes the sealed door. Wisdom becomes the dangerous cargo. And the journey remains unfinished. The unfinished human story settles into silence, not because the mystery has been solved, but because it has become too old for a simple answer. You stand at the edge of the ancient waters again, where the plain darkens under a sky full of steady stars. The reeds stir softly. The mud cools beneath the night, somewhere far away. A temple lamp burns before a god whose deepest thoughts remain below the surface. Enki's purpose has never been easy to hold. It slips from the hand like water, leaving only a chill on the skin. He appears as maker, counselor, trickster, protector, organizer, and keeper of hidden wisdom. He seems to care for humanity, yet he never removes humanity from toil. He grants knowledge, yet never grants safety. He gives warning, yet does not silence the flood before it comes. That is the old discomfort. You feel it in the clay cities that rose and fell across Mesopotamia: Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Nippur, Lagash. And other names still carry the weight of walls, canals, shrines, markets, and graves. Mainstream archaeology confirms that these cities shaped some of the earliest known traditions of writing, administration, monumental building, and literary memory. Research from institutions such as Oxford, Yale, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania has helped reveal how deeply Sumerian culture influenced later Mesopotamian civilization. Yet influence is not the same as completion. A tradition may continue while its meaning remains uncertain. The tablets survive in fragments, the gods survive in translation, the cities survive as mounds under wind and sun. Humanity survives as the creature still asking why survival feels both miraculous and insufficient. You walk through an imagined ruin at twilight. Broken bricks crunch beneath your feet. The air smells of dust, dry grass, and the faint mineral breath of old earth. A fox moves between fallen walls, utterly uninterested in civilization's need to be admired. The last light touches a mound where rooms once held grain, children, sleep, arguments, and offerings. Ruins are honest places. They do not flatter. They show that systems end. They show that temples lose their roofs. Kings lose their names, and languages become puzzles for patient strangers. They also show that disappearance is never total. A mark remains. A story remains. A baked tablet, dropped or buried by chance, remains. The dead do not speak fully, but they do not fall silent either. This is where Enki's secret plan becomes almost indistinguishable from history itself. Perhaps he does not plan a final rescue. Perhaps he plants a capacity that keeps moving through broken worlds. The capacity to remember. The capacity to rebuild. The capacity to question the powers that organize existence. The capacity to hear a whisper where others hear only wind against reeds. The quirky tidbit here belongs to the afterlife of clay. Some tablets survived because ancient buildings burned, accidentally firing the clay harder and preserving texts that might otherwise have crumbled. In other words, destruction sometimes became an archivist. History, with its usual charming lack of manners, occasionally saves a document by setting the room on fire. There is something fitting about that. The Sumerian stories themselves often turn danger into preservation. Flood threatens life, yet the vessel carries memory. Labor binds humanity, yet work creates culture. Writing records obligations, yet it also protects imagination. Fire destroys houses, yet hardens tablets. Again and again, loss becomes a strange container. You pause beside a half-buried tablet in the mind. Its signs are worn, but not gone. They look like tiny bird tracks crossing a dried riverbed. Perhaps the tablet once recorded an offering. Perhaps it preserved a hymn. Perhaps it carried a portion of a myth where Enki acts with that difficult kindness. Neither pure mercy nor pure manipulation. Whatever it held, it entered the long patience of earth. An open, scholarly debate continues around how modern readers should approach divine intention in these ancient texts. Some scholars emphasize myth as religious expression, shaped by ritual and theology. Others treat the stories as reflections of social hierarchy, environmental anxiety, and political memory. Still others approach them as literature, where divine figures explore human problems through symbolic action. The debate remains open because the evidence invites care rather than conquest. You sense that no single reading can exhaust Enki. He is too fluid for that. As god of the deep waters, he belongs to hidden sources, to what rises unseen before it nourishes fields. As god of wisdom, he belongs to the knowledge that helps and unsettles. As protector, he belongs to mercy that arrives late, indirectly, and with instructions. As architect of order, he belongs to systems that can both sustain and confine. Perhaps the ancient scribes understood contradiction better than modern impatience does. They did not need their gods to be simple. They did not need creation to be comfortable. They knew that water could bless and drown, that kings could protect and exploit, that temples could feed and demand, that writing could remember and control. They lived close to ambiguity because ambiguity lived close to them. You hear the reed beds shifting in the dark. The sound is soft, almost like breath. The ancient story does not end with a door closing. It ends with a listener still awake, wondering whether humanity was created as servant, experiment, partner, or problem. Perhaps those categories are too small. Perhaps the old myth asks you to sit with something stranger. Humanity may be unfinished by design, not incomplete in the careless sense, as though the work were abandoned, unfinished in the living sense, still becoming, still receiving fragments, still building vessels against floods whose names change across the ages, still turning clay, breath, grief, and memory into signs that someone else may someday read. The divine plan, if it exists, may not be a destination. It may be a pressure inside history, urging fragile beings to become conscious under difficult conditions. The gods create the frame, but humans fill it with unexpected depth. A worker becomes a singer, a scribe becomes a preserver, a survivor becomes an ancestor. A broken tablet becomes a question that crosses 4,000 years. And now the night grows slower. You do not need to solve the old waters tonight. Let them be deep. Let Enki remain half hidden beneath the earth of memory. Neither villain nor saviour, neither answer nor illusion. The reeds can keep their whisper. The clay can keep its missing lines. The stars can look down on the plain without explaining what they have seen. You breathe with the quiet of the ancient river. The city fades until only its outlines remain. A temple shadow, a canal glimmer, a doorway warm with lamplight. The workers are resting. The scribes have set down their styluses. The gods are far away, or very near, which in old stories can feel almost the same. Perhaps humanity was made to serve. Perhaps humanity was taught to endure. Perhaps humanity was given knowledge because even the gods needed witnesses. Perhaps Enki's secret was never a command hidden in clay, but a patient trust placed inside mortal memory. The water moves beneath everything. It moves beneath fields, beneath ruins, beneath sleep, beneath the quiet chambers of the mind. It carries no final answer. It carries the possibility of another question. And perhaps, In that soft uncertainty, the Sumerian story remains alive. The lamp burns lower now. The desert cools. The old tablets rest in darkness, holding their broken signs like seeds. You may close your eyes and leave the scholars to their lamps, the priests to their songs, the rivers to their ancient beds. Nothing more must be proven here. Nothing more must be carried tonight. Let the unfinished story loosen its grip. Let the flood become only distant rain. Let the divine council become only thunder beyond the horizon. Let the clay city sink gently into dream, with its ovens cold, its gates closed, its canals silver under the moon. The god of deep waters keeps his silence, and the silence is not empty. It is possible that every ancient story is also a vessel. It carries fear, memory, warning, and comfort through the dark. You have listened beside its edge for a little while. You have heard the reeds, the stylus, the river, and the hidden voice beneath them. Now those sounds grow softer. The human story continues elsewhere, but not loudly. It continues in sleep, in breath, in the calm returning of the night. The clay does not ask you to understand everything. The water does not ask you to follow. It simply moves, as it always has, under the sleeping world, and perhaps the story is not yet complete.